Hello guys and welcome back. So in the last section we talked about the built-in structural and attribute directives. Now in this section we'll create our own custom structural and attribute directives. Okay, so we'll start with custom directives. Now custom directives are again TypeScript classes that are decorated with the directive decorator, and then they contain a selector in the form of a metadata to which we specify the attribute that we want to use as a selector for a particular directive. So let's quickly create a directive here. Okay, so I'll type in g for generate, d for directive, and in the directives folder I'll create my first attribute directive. Let's call it change case. Okay, so what this directive I'm envisioning for this directive is that it will change the case of whatever the user types in. Okay, so if I go to this directive here, then I'll see that there's already an app change case selector added. Okay, so now with this, I can essentially use it in my component. I don't really have any component where I can host these directives, so let me just create a component as well. So in the components folder, I'm going to create a directive host component. Okay, and this will create the component files for me. In the app routing module, I'm also going to add a path for directives, and I'll specify the component name as directive host component, like so. That I'll have to import. Okay, now in the directive host components template, let's create an input field, which is of type text. I can simply use the directive in here, like just take the name of this without the square brackets, like so, and I can use it. Now to check if it is working, or whether the directive is getting called, I'll simply log something to the console. Let's save this and go back to the template here. Let's see, it's saying disconnected. Not sure why. The app is running, so I'm going to have to empty cache and hard reload, I guess. Okay, if I go to the built-in directives now, let's do one thing. Let's add the link to the component host or the directive host in our headers as well. Directives, and this would be directives as well. So if I save this now and go back, then I should see a directives section as well. If I click on it, then something gets printed to the screen. So we can say that the directive was called. Okay, now in the directive host component, if I change something, then I want that change, or I want this particular value inside the directive so that I can play around with it or change it. Okay, so to get an instance of the element that this directive sits on, I can inject something known as the element ref as a dependency. Okay, so I'll inject that element ref. I'll have to import it from Angular core. Okay, now I can also, since this has an ng on in it, if I use that lifecycle hook for the directive, then I can simply log the element ref value property to the console. So let me just log that console log and the value of this. Okay, let's save this. And now, right now there's no value, so nothing got printed. But if I change it, or maybe let's say if this directive had a value initially of say Siddharth, then Siddharth would have printed to the console from this change case directive. Okay, now with the name of this directive, it might be pretty clear to you guys as to what exactly I'm going to do in here. So what I will do is that if the user types something in and blurs away from this directive or blurs away from this input text field, then the case of the text that the user typed in should change accordingly. Okay, so now since we will have to listen to the blur event on this input element, there is something that can be injected as a dependency for that as well in the directive. Okay, and that is something that won't be injected as a dependency, but we can get a hold of it using something called a host listener. Okay, the host listener is something that I'll have to import from Angular core, and to the host listener we need to pass the name of the event that we want to listen to. So in this case, the event name is blur, and after this we specify a handler for this event. Okay, so whenever the blur event happens, then I want to do something with it. Okay, so let's name this handler as on blur. Okay, now let's say that I wanted to simply change the case of this to uppercase. Okay, so I'll do something like this. So what I'm doing essentially is I'm taking the element that I injected as a dependency. I'm accessing the native element here, which is going to give me the actual DOM element or the actual DOM input element for me. Okay, and then I can access its value attribute to get the value of it. And then since this value is going to be a string, I can call a to uppercase method on it to essentially change all the characters in it to uppercase. Okay, so this will happen on blur, and after changing that value to uppercase, I'm simply reassigning the value property of the input to this uppercase text, like so. So let's save this and go back. Now if I type something in, let's say this garbage text and blur, then it gets converted into uppercase. Okay, I can do the same by calling lowercase on it. Save, and if there is a text here, then it will all be converted into lowercase. Let's type something in, all in uppercase. If I blur, then it's going to get converted into lowercase. Okay, so this is a way in which you can use directives in custom attribute directives in Angular to basically change the attributes of a particular element that this directive sits on. Okay, but there are a lot of cases, or there might be some cases wherein See, Angular is not really restricted to just run on the browsers. It can also run in cases wherein it might not have access to the DOM. Okay, it might run in cases like in service workers, or it might also run in cases wherein you have to basically generate some content on server. Okay, so server side rendering is required in that case, and in that case, you might not have access to the DOM. Okay, so if that is the case, then you might not have access to the DOM properties, so we cannot directly access the DOM and change it like so. Okay, so there is a better way to do this, and that better way is by using something called a renderer. Okay, so let's first inject a renderer as a dependency. This is going to be of type renderer2. Okay, that can be imported from Angular core. So I'll do that. Okay, and now with the help of this renderer, we can basically change the value of this element. Okay, so let's first get this value here. So I can do something like value, or say change the value. Okay, and I'm sure that this is going to be a string, and this is something that I'll be taking from the element.value property. Okay, now with the let's just convert it into lowercase itself right here. Okay, and now with the help of this renderer, I can call a method like set property. Okay, and to the set property, it requires 3 arguments. First one is the element that we want to change that property on. Second thing would be the name of that property, and the third thing is the value of it. Okay, so the element is going to be this element reference that we injected as a dependency. The name of the property that I want to change is the value, and the value is going to be the changed value, like so. Okay, so if I save this now and go back, I'm essentially converting it into lowercase. So if I type something in uppercase and blur away, then it should have converted it. Okay, let's check. Maybe I did something wrong with the template. Oh, okay, so this required the native element here, but I didn't pass it that. So I just done that. Now if I go back and type something here in uppercase and blur away, then it gets converted into lowercase. Okay, let's see that again in action. Right, so okay, now we have a directive that's using the renderer instead of directly accessing and changing values on the DOM. Okay, so this is one of the better ways of implementing an attribute directive. Now let's say that right here we just have the 2 lowercase or 2 uppercase hard coded in here, right? But if say we wanted the user of this directive to tell us how they want the text to be transformed, what exactly can be done in that case? Well, as we already know, we can do that using things like input properties. So let's say if this has a case and I specify here the value as upper and save this, now I'll have to define a case, an input property named case in here. So let's do that. Input case, which is of type string. I'll have to import input from Angular core. So let's do that here. Okay, and now if based on the value of this case, I can essentially call 2 uppercase or 2 lowercase on this string value that we take from the native element. So to do that, I'll simply specify the case. I'll check for the case as upper, and if okay, let's rename this from case to something else maybe, or I'll have to specify a question mark as well. So if this dot case is equal to upper, then it has to change it to uppercase, else it has to change it to lowercase, like so. Let's save this, and right now we have specified upper, so if I blur out from that text field, it's changing it to uppercase. But if I was here and the value was in uppercase and I had to change it to lower, then if I blurred out, then it would change this to lowercase. Okay, but here as you can see, we had to use some other attribute binding to pass this value to it. But what if we wanted to just use this directive here as an attribute binding, or sorry, as a property binding, and then pass this value of this case in here? Well, in that case, we can simply alias this case here and alias it to the name of this directive, like so. Okay, and now I can simply get rid of this case here, and let's do that. And I'll use property binding now in this case and save it like so. Okay, now if I hover out or if I blur out, then the directive is still working, but the template in this case is a bit more cleaner. Okay, so this is how you can create attribute directives in Angular. Initially, we used the element ref to simply change the value property of this native element directly, but there are some cases in which we don't really should be doing this, or we shouldn't really be changing the DOM, because there might be cases in which Angular is running in some environments where there is no access to DOM. So in that case, a renderer should be used that can be imported from Angular core, and then in the renderer, we can simply call method like set property and then change the property value of this native element, that is our input field, to this value that we can specify in here. Okay, and we can use host listener to listen to an event on that particular input field, like so. Okay, so this was all regarding attribute directives in Angular. Now in the next video, we'll talk about creating a custom structural directive in Angular. So I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye.